What is up, my dashing dudes and darling dames? I am the Hans TV, and welcome back to the subreddit that just makes you wonder how people are so technologically illiterate. It's r/TalesFromTechSupport. Our first push for today comes from Sarasota. You didn't try the brightness buttons before you took the PC apart, did you? I recently started a job at your friendly neighborhood computer repair shop. This particular story revolves around a laptop with the usual CS machine powers on but the screen is black ticket. I received the ticket, powered on the PC to confirm the black screen, and saw an image but with no backlight. I relayed this across the desk to my boss, who came over, looked at it and said, "Yup, that's a bad backlight," and then showed me the procedure for ordering a new screen. Meanwhile, I get sidetracked with a different task, and he begins disassembly of the PC. Eventually the part arrives, but boss is out of the office that day. So I'm the only one in the PC repair department. I grab the PC from the back, replace the screen, and get a nice little dopamine shot when I see that the new screen works as intended, and I haven't broken anything in the process. So I'm fiddling around with the screen and testing it. I move the mouse, log in, and get on the internet. I have achieved victory. Then I mess with the brightness buttons, moving it from its brightest to darkest setting. As the brightness hits its lowest setting, my heart drops. The backlight shuts off. Apparently on this model of PC, you can completely shut off the backlight. I had never considered this to be a possibility. It's totally impossible to read the screen without the backlight. So, what use case could anyone ever have for this? I sheepishly text my boss. "Hey, sorry to bother you on your day off, but did you happen to mess with the brightness keys on this ticket before you took it apart? Apparently you can completely shut off the backlight on this model for some reason." "No, I didn't know you could do that." I'm reeling. What if the screen worked the entire time, and we just never thought to hit the increase brightness key? What if we cost this guy all this money, had his computer away from him for all this time, and did all this work because we just didn't think to hit the button to increase brightness? The guy had to have mashed the brightness buttons at least a couple of times before he thought to take it into a shop, right? I don't know. We all know how end users are. The PC is already reassembled at this point, so I'll never know if that screen was truly faulty. This will keep me awake for the rest of my life. Cold sweats running down my face. I'll never know. Was that screen really broken? No matter how dumb you may feel as a tech, always know that there is a customer who is dumber than you. Our next post comes from Banan Koenig. Why would they even make that button? So I'm not tech support by trade. I'm a network engineer, but as a person in a technical job, that makes me support for all technology for everyone I've ever met. I try to fend it off and succeed most of the time, but close friends and family sometimes slip through the cracks. This happened last weekend and made me think of this sub. A friend of mine was coming over to hang out and asked if she could bring her laptop. Her college needed her to be on camera for the entirety of her final, and she tried to test her camera and it wouldn't turn on. To her credit, she tried a bunch of things, including a factory reset. None of this worked. I assumed it was a faulty driver, and all I would need to do was download a new driver and call it good. A half hour into the laptop telling me the camera is unavailable, and me trying to figure out why the drivers aren't showing up on the device manager, I decide to check the BIOS. Of course, she doesn't know what key boots to BIOS. I start mashing the usual suspects. On my second attempt, I look at the keys and see a blue camera icon under the F8 key. At this point, I give up on BIOS and literally physically facepalm. Of course, the laptop has function keys to shut off hardware, because why wouldn't it? So, after booting into Windows and hitting function F8, I open the webcam manager and show her it works. I then proceed to show her everything that the function keys can shut off in case she runs into a similar problem again. Now, my shame is public and I accept the ridicule. To be fair, OP, I have never seen a function key that shuts off the camera. So, of course, that's not going to be your first go-to. Our final post for today comes from Gion. The trick. I am a software developer. While not strictly tech support, you seem to like my stories. This story is about one particularly difficult client. A few stapled together papers landed on my desk. I looked up. It was my boss. "Good morning, Gian. Can you take a look at these requirements and give me an estimate? We might have a new project for you." "Sure thing, boss." My boss is the best boss ever. It could be that he is just and rational, wanting to keep me employed because I'm good at what I do, but I don't think so. He's also a great guy. The requirements were nothing special. Collect some data, display some reports, stuff like that. Simple. The client was happy with my estimate, so we go meet them. My contact at the client is a tall, large man in his 60s. I am tall myself, but he is towering above me at yet another 4 inches. His handshake is firm, bordering to abusive. When he speaks, the whole room resonates with his bass voice. He has a gravitas that forces you to take him seriously. If this was the Stone Age, he would be the clan leader, and no one would think of questioning it. A true alpha male.
Hello, Gian. I'm Alpha,
he says. Once the room has stopped resonating and he has given my hand back, I involuntarily compare myself to him. I am lanky with a creaky voice. I had a baby face until I turned 35 and can barely grow a beard. Good thing I base my sense of self-worth on my professional abilities instead. We land the project, and a couple of weeks later we have another meeting, having built most of what the initial requirements asked for. I was proud to show the prototype of the interface. The client seemed mostly happy, but had some additional features they wanted to add. This went on for a couple of weeks. Each of them in isolation wasn't a big deal, but they started to add up. We call this phenomenon feature creep. The creep of features eventually slowed down, but not until they included a complete customer relationship management tool. Alpha was not happy with the rate of progress. Unfortunately, I did not have much to demo, since I was working on the underlying structure rather than the user interface. I suggested I would add parts of the UI as mockups, non-functional interfaces to make it easier to visualize the end product. This made Alpha happy, but he was still impatient. He suggested that he would make sketches of the screens for me to implement. This was a great idea, because having something visual makes it easier to communicate and reason about the project. It is a tool I have used a lot. A couple of days later, Alpha comes back. He is excited. He has drawn up sketches in PowerPoint for about 10 screens, and even added links on buttons to flip to the target sketch. This is great. I immediately notice inconsistencies though. That is okay, it is just a sketch. The whole point is to sort that kind of issues out. So I start building the mockup UI based on the sketches, but with my own corrections. In some places, the sketched are a bit nonsensical. That is okay too. Not everyone is a professional user interface designer. I just adapt the sketches as needed. I show my progress to Alpha regularly, but he seems less satisfied each day. Eventually, he makes it clear that he expects me to follow his sketches exactly. There is no room for my interpretation. Whoa. The sketches have suddenly become a specification. Inconsistencies and all. What is worse is that Alpha has become so emotionally invested in the sketches that I have to argue for each and every change. I can sense that this is a delicate subject, but I feel it is my duty as a professional to try to reason with Alpha. Hey Alpha, the sketches are great starting points for talking, but not great UI. Perhaps let me do the actual designs? I am a professional.
I have worked on successful software projects for decades. I think I know what I'm doing.
I needed a way forward, so I talk with my boss. He is baffled as well, but suggests we try to give Alpha what he asks for, since reasoning with him isn't working. I put aside the UI I'd been working on and start over fresh. When I tried to deduce the underlying data structure from the designs, things like contact info would be wildly inconsistent. Sometimes there would be multiple phone numbers or none. Same with names and email. Physical addresses would have random parts missing. Okay, I let Alpha know about each issue and built them the way he sketched them out. All of his completed designs were broken and half-baked. Alpha actually seemed happier after this, but he complained about the size of the screens. He had to scroll to see all of each screen. He does not like scrolling. I prodded him about the actual issue. It turned out he had designed the user interface in PowerPoint to fit each screen in its entirety on the computer at once. His computer. After more questioning, I found out that he has a 14-inch laptop. The end users have either 24-inch desktop monitors or smartphones. Part of the problem is that Alpha has invented his own UI paradigms. Screens would have a fixed layout with no scrolling. Web apps don't work like that. I believe his decades of experience was from terminal-based mainframe systems, like the airports and banks usually have. Alpha wanted to use input fields to display output data, to make input-output text fields distinct. They would have to be differently colored borders. I explained that a separate output layout for input/output is much more compact, easier to read, and actually had a hope of fitting on his laptop screen. But he was not interested. He did not know what a pop-up modal dialog was. You know, when you save a file and a dialog asks for a location in the file name, and you can't continue working until you click OK or cancel. He instead insisted on creating new entries by selecting New in a select box that would also select an existing entry for editing or display. This is bad separation of concerns and leads to horrible, messy code. It is also tricky when there is no existing entry, and you can't detect when the New option is selected, because it is the only one. All of this made the development take at least 4 times as long as necessary. Somehow, the project chugged along. After completing all mockups, it was time to add the actual functionality. Keep in mind that nothing so far worked. It was all a facade, like a Western movie set. I began to explain the methodology we like, and that I personally, as well as most of the software industry, believes in. Minimum viable project. In essence, you start with something tiny and expand on it, making sure you always have something working. This is important, because the alternative to plan everything out in detail and start building it all at once very rarely works, is expensive, slow, and can't handle changing requirements. And requirements always change. This kind of mismanaged project can easily kill a company. So, as you see, we should start small and expand the project one feature at a time to ensure we stay on track.
No, since we have a little time, it is important that you complete one PowerPoint screen at a time and do not go back to it. When it is done, it is done. I absolutely do not want to hear that you are rewriting code that has already been completed.
At this point, I tried to explain about technical debt and how it affects software projects. Basically, when you write code, you make assumptions. And as you make changes to the code, the assumptions are no longer true, if they ever were. So old pieces make less and less sense. So the pieces don't really fit together that well anymore. This needs to be fixed, and if you don't, you accumulate technical debt. Once this debt grows too large and you have weird looking code all over the place, and making any changes becomes very time consuming or even impossible. The fix is to constantly rewrite code so it makes more sense. This is called refactoring. But Alpha brushed me off, clearly not interested in excuses. My boss glanced at me with wide eyes. Once Alpha left, I asked my boss about the no rewrite rule. Boss, you do know I constantly rewrite code, right? Yeah, what's his problem? Don't worry about it for now. Just do your job the way you decide. This all took a great toll on my mental health, giving me a lot of stress. I got headaches from clenching my jaws and had to take painkillers every night. Later, Alpha complained about my people skills. My boss, knowing this was BS, decided he would be our contact person, shielding me from Alpha. He also contacted the client CEO to talk about the communication difficulties. The CEO apologized and told boss that Alpha had had a freak out with their own people recently, but had promised to behave. I also found out their hardware person, also managed by Alpha, was on the verge of burning out. Luckily for my mental health, I was needed on another project, so an older colleague took over. We spent some time together, bringing him up to speed and solving issues he ran into. During one of these sessions, we ended up talking about my frustration. It was hard, you know, I wanted to do my best. I take pride in my work, but he just wouldn't let me succeed. A wistful air somehow engulfed us, like sunlight through a window on a bleak November morning. He looked into my eyes, searching for something, like he was looking directly into my soul. I remember what that was like, feeling proud. Even these days, it still happens from time to time. So, how do you handle it? The unreasonable demands. What is your trick? Like a burst soap bubble, the moment was suddenly over and the wistfulness in his voice was replaced by a somber tone. When they won't respect my professional opinion, I just stopped giving a crap. In the end, Alpha became so difficult to work with that my boss refused to work with him and dropped the client. I can just see this conversation now.
I want this to be exactly this way. There is no going back. You cannot rewrite the code. Nothing.
Sir? That's not how this works.
I don't care. Do it how I say.
Well, alright my dashing dudes and darling dames, that is going to do it for today's episode of r/Tales from Tech Support. I hope you liked the stories, and if you did, I'll link them in the description as always. And if you liked the video, subscribe, share, Drop a like and a comment down below which you'd like to see me read next. A humongous thank you to everyone who has subscribed. We're at 430 at the time of recording this, and we're so close to 500. I cannot thank y'all enough for pushing my channel how y'all have. But with that being said, I will see you in the next video.